So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I teach ethics in natural language processing. Um, so I think it's very important. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I just a manipulation problem. Nothing really. Okay, here we are. So as Gordon said, it's very important to realize that we are all biased. So that it's very important to say where we talk from, so that people understand which bias might be ours. I'm talking from natural language processing, but from a very specific point of view in language processing, because I'm specializing in creating language resources, data to nourish the systems, and especially using crowdsourcing, using games in particular. So I worked on that, and I still work on that, and that's my main work. And I also do, and more do, ethics and natural language processing. At the moment, I'm co-chair of the ACL Ethics Committee, ACL being the international organization for NLP. I'm also project ethics officer of an international European project that's called AI Proficient. And I used to be a member of the Sorbonne IRB with Raja and other colleagues. So I have this point of view that's very specific. Keep that in mind. It's important. So where is ethic now? Where is NLP in terms of ethics? Where are we? So we asked the question in a survey in 2015. We asked the participants in the community on mailing lists and so on, if there was a class on ethics in their curricula. Okay, if they were teaching in a curriculum, was there a class on ethics? And the answer was clearly no. For 67% of them, of the participants, there was no class on ethics in their curricula. So you see, there was quite a gap at that time. You have to note that the yes came from, in a large majority, from the US. My experience in teaching ethics dates from 2018, I would say, and from the very beginning, I started with doing do-it-yourself, because I think it's very important to put students and people who learn, to put them in action. As soon as they start on a topic, they should be in action, and then you give them some background information. So I started that at that time in Grenoble, and I did that as a one-shot seminar at that time. It was a 3-hour seminar. So now I do it on demand when people have only 3 hours or 2.5 hours. I do a one-shot seminar, but it can also be a very interesting and very fruitful introduction to a real class on the subject. Here is how I organize it. It's, as I said, a 2.5 to 3 hour slot. I divide the class in groups of 3 or 4, depending on how many students I have, obviously. And I give them one newspaper article per group in their language. So if they are French students, it's in French. English-speaking students, it's in English. The vast majority of my students were from, international community, so it was in English. The subjects are not random. Obviously, I choose them carefully, and I will show you a sample of what I propose to the students. They can pick the subject. They have a long time to prepare, because preparation is about reading the paper, takes a little bit of time, depending on your command of English, for example. Then they have to discuss between themselves in the group, and it also takes time. And that time, by the way, is core. And my colleagues already said that it's really important that there's enough time to discuss the issues. And then they have to prepare a little bit how they're going to present. But they have no slides to present, and they have very little time. They have 5 minutes of presentation to present to the others. And well, we give them time. We give time for questions afterwards. So the idea is that obviously there's no pressure, no evaluation. The idea is that they are the one who think, they are the one who explain to the others. So that's very important because we know that peer learning is the best way to learn. So they learn among themselves and they debate. So don't worry, I'm not, just sitting in the back and, sipping coffee. I'm participating and I'll explain what I do after that. But it's important to note that it's right up front. They have no background, that I give them newspaper articles, not research articles. So that's easier to deal with. It's easier to read and it's not complex. What I ask them to do is to have a professional point of view on what's happening. It's very important, again, as Gordana said, it's very important to have a technical point of view, a scientific point of view on the issues. So not just the first, layer of explanation. I want them to present the issues and if they can, to try and explain if there's a workaround, how it could have been avoided, uh, what happened, what are the causes of this, and so on and so forth. So I want them to go deep into the analysis. So here are a couple of examples of the couple of articles that I give them. Some examples, okay, there are more than that. As I'm interested in data production, I'm interested in data quality, so I proposed them a number of papers about that. And in particular, I often ask at least one group to deal with data production, because we often, in NLP, but I think in machine learning in general, we often forget, it's easy to forget that there are people behind the data, there are people producing data. And here I propose them, for example, to talk about micro-working platforms like Amazon Mechanical Turk. So that's an example of something that's a little bit unusual from the only consequentialist point of view that often forget about stakeholders that there are stakeholders in the production of data. I also like this paper, although it's a little bit old now, but I think it's still valid. It's about machine learning in the wild. What happens when you put a model in the wild that learns, that continues learning? That's quite interesting, and from the technical point of view, that's also interesting. I propose also, obviously, to talk about consent. When you build a system, how you can minimize the data collection. And this example, I think, is really nice because it's very recent. You can, create an app and collect location data, and without being aware or realizing that people might suffer from that data collection. That's interesting because very few students know that data is sold, that there's something that's called data brokers, and that they sell data, that's their job. And I think it's a good point of entry into this question of data as a good, as something that is sold. Obviously, we talk about carbon footprint because it has now become a subject in NLP, and it's very important that it is. And I give them this paper. That's a very good paper, by the way, by Karën Howe from the MIT Tech Review. If you haven't read it, have a look. She's a very good journalist. We talk about time a lot. I try to talk about time a lot, and this paper helps. It's about long-term consequences. Uh, it's not only about that, but I try to help them push the subject of long-term consequences with this paper, because it's about Alexa using the kid's dead grandma's voice to talk to the kid, and that's interesting to talk about what might be the long-term consequences on a child of such a system. I also talk quite a bit about confirmation biases. That is, when a system proposes not a solution but a suggestion, we tend to accept this suggestion. That's a very natural reflex that we have. It's a cognitive process that's well known. It's the easiest path. And in context where there's an economic pressure into doing things faster, and that's why we put AI, by the way, to help to go faster. It means that there are less people doing the work, and it also means you have less time to focus on what are the outputs proposed by the systems. You tend to accept the solutions of the systems. There are many examples of such biases. This one is quite interesting because it's easy to imagine. It's on face recognition used by the police and without a lot of scrutiny behind that. So that's an interesting point of entrance again into confirmation biases. And then I try to push them toward asking themselves if we should draw a red line somewhere. That's, I think, a question that you already heard about. It's very important to decide whether we should, in fact, redevelop that kind of applications. And one good example of that is predictive systems. We have a number of such examples in NLP, of NLP systems predicting things like your IQ, for example, from the text you wrote, or even worse than that, if you are going to be, I don't know, an engineer, or if you're going to be a nurse, or if you're going to be whatever. So these systems should be maybe thought in terms of, should we really do that? So I push the students toward asking themselves that. And it's really interesting because there's the debate going on in the classroom. So basically, these were the examples. My role is to open their ethical chakras at that time of the teaching, and to show them that in practice there's not just consequentialism, and there's been talk about that before by Catherine, and she did great, so I don't want to go into too many details. But yes, you can also have a more systemic view than consequentialism. You can also have a deontological view, that is, you shall not do that. You can also have a systemic view on, we are in a system, considering the entire system and not just what's obvious to us. So that's what I try to push using these examples and through the students themselves. My goal is to show that it's a question of time. Ethics is a question of taking the time to sit together, sipping a coffee, why not, and talking about our projects, our research, our new product. And I show them that in 1 hour, without basic training, they can start a conversation, they can start reflecting. Of course, you need more training to reflect further, but at least in 1 hour, we have the basis to start a reflection. And as specialists of the domain in NLP, we can go further than the journalist in the paper. My role, if any, but often I need to intervene, it's to widen their perspective, in fact. It's surprising how it's difficult to push them towards seeing that the world around them is not only about being a white male human being living in a rich country or a rich region with internet access. It's often difficult to make them realize that there might be, people who are stakeholders in the system somewhere who suffer from it. In particular, consider the carbon footprint. We develop language models like GPT-3, and it costs like more than an entire human life in terms of carbon footprint. And the consequences, the applications we benefit from, because we have this, that on our computer, but the people suffering from the consequences do not benefit from the system. So it's really interesting to try to open their chakra so that they see that there other people elsewhere who might suffer from what we're doing. I try also to push them toward deepening their analysis in terms of what happened technically, scientifically, can we avoid this, how, and again, there were people making the decisions. It's not magic. Machine learning is not magic. Something happened. People made the decisions. People decided to consider gender as binary, for example, in this and that system. And more importantly, that's, I think, my main job is to make them feel how important they are, so that they realize they are responsible for what they're doing, and that they realize that when they are in a research project or in a company, they are also responsible to be the Gandalf of the, doing the "you shall not pass" gesture, because it's their job. They are responsible for that too. So quickly, I'm finishing. Now I turn this do-it-yourself, I have to say, it's very successful. Students are thrilled, they are motivated, they want to go further, and they are very, as the presentations are very short, they are very frustrated. So this part of the conversation usually goes on after, and it goes on during the entire class. It's really nice. So I think creating a little bit of frustration really helps. It's, yes, it's seductive, it works. So the next step, I organized the doctoral training at Loria with colleagues Mathieu Daquin and Maxime Amblard and Mark Anderson on November 3rd and 4th. So it will be in 2 weeks now. And the idea here is to do something a little bit different. That is, yes, we'll have this do-it-yourself. So the doctoral students will come and the PhD students will come and they will work on maybe their PhD topic or a topic that's close to their PhD topic. But they will go further than that. They will produce something. They will write a dystopia. The idea is that they go further than just analyzing what's happening. They will try to imagine so that they go further. We hope that with that, they will go even further in the reflection. So this is the program. So on day one, we will give them a little bit of basis on philosophy. As you already mentioned, the different types of approaches that might exist, so that they at least see that there are different ways of seeing a dystopia, that it can go wrong not only in terms of the usage of your application, but also in the way you, for example, you make people work for you to develop your application. And there will be somebody showing them a case study and a third person showing them the role of dystopia and science fiction to help thinking ethical issues. These persons were co-organizers of the workshop that was called Recording Black Mirror. I don't know if some of you heard about it, but that's the idea. So they'll start practicing and reflecting and trying to prepare a backbone scenario. And on the second day, they will have a professional writer, creative writing, to help them guide them into building a complete scenario and developing characters and their story. We want them to be able to produce something, maybe just a draft or something that's really preliminary, so that and they to share that between themselves. We have the idea that they'll probably be motivated to create something that's really nice in the end, and will be able maybe to communicate with. We already have obviously the doctoral training is full already. It's been full for a while now, so we'll probably have to do it again and again. Hopefully, we'll get some productions, hopefully publishable, maybe on a leaflets or maybe short stories or even comics. And we want to export this training to other labs in RIA labs in France or elsewhere in Europe. The idea is to see what we can produce that's interesting for the training, but then the material that will be produced might be used for teaching. So it will produce a virtual circle. So thank you for your attention. This is the ethics excuse bingo we created with Emily Bender a couple of months ago, I think. Do not hesitate to use it during your meetings, your conferences, your seminars. And thank you very much.